In Rio de Janeiro, stores, hairdressers, and beauty salons are open again after more than 100 days. The reopening coming even though Brazil is recording some of the fastest growing cases of COVID-19. Rio officials say their death toll is down, but they're requiring shops to limit the number of customers. Brazil has the second highest number of cases and deaths in the world. More than 1.3 million people have been infected. More than 57,000 people have now died. Joining me for more on that is Valentina from the Atlantic Council. She's the Assistant Director of their Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to first start off in Brazil, one of the worst hit countries after the U.S. Why?
Thank you for having me. Yes, Brazil has been hit hard by the pandemic. The government unfortunately downplayed the seriousness of this disease at first, and now we're taking steps towards implementing the quarantine measures and taking into consideration the health system in the country. But because of the economic hardships, we see the reopening of some economies, and of course, we see a spike in the number of cases as these states reopen.
We have seen some places where the local leadership has tried to go against perhaps the tone being set by Jair Bolsonaro in Niterói, across the bay from Rio, for example. The mayor there really leading the way in testing, with drive-through testing now introduced. Are we seeing that across Brazil and in other parts of Latin America, really local leadership fighting back?
Yes, absolutely. We see that local leadership is really taking a step towards making sure that this reopening is safe and responsible. And what we must see here is that there is more testing being done to make sure that this reopening is safe and that we can see continuous improvement and the economy can go back to normal. We see the testing is being done throughout Latin America, particularly in São Paulo, as the number of cases have risen after the reopening of the state. The government is also taking into consideration imposing new measures of quarantine to control the spread.
Argentina has extended its lockdown in Buenos Aires. It wasn't doing as badly as some other Latin American countries. So what happened?
Yeah, Argentina was the case that was considered a success in Latin America, was one of the first countries in the region to impose lockdown and travel bans. However, the country was already dealing with economic difficulties. Even now, besides the country's debt negotiation process currently underway, the pandemic deepened the recession, posing additional hardship to the population. The population is tired and getting to the point, or actually post the point, of being able to sustain this lifestyle. So we see throughout Latin America businesses closing, people losing their jobs, the virus continuing to spread, particularly in poorer communities, such as in the favelas in Brazil and the villas in Argentina. People can no longer stay at home. And unfortunately, the government aid has not been enough to meet the needs of the population. Because of this economic hardship, countries began a gradual reopening of their economies. So we've seen a rising number of cases across the region in Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Peru, but this trend is one we've seen throughout the world, including in the US. When governments begin loosening quarantine measures and gradually reopening the economy, there is a tendency to see a spike in the number of cases. Of course, more testing is being done to ensure the reopening, as I had mentioned, is safe, but response needs to be taken to make sure that this, if necessary, isolation measures can be put in place again.
The IMF says Latin America and the Caribbean are the new global epicenter of the pandemic. It expects the region's economies to shrink by nearly 10% this year. Are there continued efforts to support some of the poorest people in this part of the world that will be affected?
Yes, we've seen that the governments have taken, particularly in Brazil and Argentina, we've seen the governments taking measures to ensure that the most vulnerable population are being supported. However, as I mentioned, this aid has not been enough to effectively help these people and also businesses. We see that 113 million people in Latin America, nearly 1 in 5 live in slums. And taking into consideration the infrastructure and the dependency of these populations in the informal sector and the services sector, mostly the most affected sectors during this quarantine, we see that this isolation is being hard to keep in place.
All right, Valentina Sutter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.